Okay, so this is the last video. There's quite a lot in this video. I probably should have broken it into two. But essentially what we're going to do here is deal with game over a bit more elegantly by putting a message on the screen and allowing the user to press the space bar to start again. And we are also have to wrap up some of the setup code, some of the sort of initialization code into this new game function so that I can restart the game, not just start it, but restart it. And finally, I've added some music and sound effects, and I'll show you how to do those. So the new imports that we've got are graphics here. This allows me to draw text on the screen and various other things, in fact, but I only use it to draw text. Resource and media are to do with playing sound files. And then this isn't part of Pyglet, but this itertools library, sort of extra functions to do with iteration. Anyone who's interested in getting more into Python, really an excellent place to start is just to learn every function in itertools. What I import here is cycle, which allows me to keep going through the next item in a list, and when I get to the end, go back to the beginning. So it's like a circular list. It turns a list into a circular list and calls it a cycle. And I use that for my background music, which goes on and on and on in a very monotonous way if you happen to be very good at the game and can play it for a long time. So the onDraw function is exactly the same as before, except that if the game happens to be over, it goes ahead and draws the game over message on top of everything else. What else? Here's the new game function. You'll see that a lot of the code that was right at the end at the module level has now been lifted and put into this new game function, and as long as I use this global keyword here, these values will be defined as global variables and therefore be accessible by some other functions here. This is just a little check here. If you happen to, and maybe we'll look at it towards the end of this video, if you change the size here, or indeed you change the size of the snake, you can end up having a tiny snake on a very big world, or a big sort of long thin world, or a big fat snake on a small world, and various bits and pieces, and it still works. The sums, the arithmetic still works. What else have we got here? Let's just scroll up. Draw game over. This is quite complicated. You just really have to look this up in the documentation here. I create one of these label objects. This is an F string here. My score is essentially the length of my tail. So if I've eaten one food, my tail will have grown by 1 and my score will be 1. So I just need to report the length of my tail when I'm done and say press spacebar to finish, and I have happened to have chosen a font size of 24, and I play around with some of these things. This aligns the text to the middle of the screen and says that my X should be measured from the center of the text, and my Y should be measured from the center up down of my text. And what else is there? This extra argument here, just so that I can put score on one line and press space to restart on another. But you can look up how that works. And then I call gameoverscreen.draw, which means that when the onDraw function is called, it will go ahead and actually write that text on the screen. What else do I need to worry about here? On key press has changed a tiny bit, because if I now say, as long as the game isn't over, then listen for left, right, up, down. But if the game is over, then if the thing that they pressed was space, then go ahead and call new game, and that resets all the values ready to start the game again. Empties the tail and puts the food somewhere else, and that sort of stuff. What else do I need to worry about here? Yeah, some bits to do with the sound. Game over condition we did last time. Let's look at this. So what I've done is in my folder here that contains all my .py files, I've now got a resources directory, and I've got some background music. In fact, I've got 5 different background musics. You could easily do it with one. But I found that having exactly the same music playing all the time is even more monotonous and annoying than it is the way that I've done it here, where I've got 5 different tunes that play one after the other. And this is what this cycle thing's all about. It plays 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And if you're not dead yet, it goes back to 1 and 2 and so on. Carries on doing that. And then I've got 2 other effects here. One is the effect a sort of thudding sound when you hit the wall or you hit yourself, and then the other is an effect that is the sound that's played when you eat something. So this is all module level code. This isn't in a function as such, so let's just quickly check what's going on here. When we start this, we do the imports, we draw the window, and then all these functions are defined, but the next piece of code that executes is right down here when I read in these wave files, and I assign them to variables and then start queuing them up and playing them. This one's worth looking at. Streaming equals false here. This is for the eat sound. It's possible that when you eat a piece of food, that the new random place for the next piece of food is right in front of where you are, in which case you happen to eat 2 pieces of food in very quick succession. If you don't put streaming equals false here, then you can start eating the next piece of food before the sound effect of the last piece of food is over, and you'll get an error when that happens. So it's quite rare that that happens, but this extra argument prevents that from happening. So I set myself up a cycle object, which is what itertools gives me, which is made of a list of all my different background musics as defined here. Got to get my folder correct resources right in the current directory, and then I set up this code here. Not sure this player loop equals true is necessary. I'll try not having that in there. I think that's old, an old way of using that code. So I set up this media player object. I queue up my whole playlist, which is this cycle of background music, and I go ahead and play it, and it just doesn't stop until the program is over. Then I call my new game, which is important to do right at the beginning because all of that setup code was wrapped up in this new game function. And the only thing I need to do now is when particular events happen, I want to play my my sound effects for eating. So for instance, this is my check collision with food code, which we did a few videos ago. When that happens, now I go ahead and play this eat sound effect. And similarly here, once and once only. I don't want to be playing this over and over and over again. One of the reasons that I defined a game over variable rather than repeatedly calling this game over condition function was so that I didn't end up playing this crash sound again and again. So I play the crash sound, but I set game over equals true so that I can sort of play it once and never have to play it again. Now I think the sound doesn't come across when I play this, so you'll have to actually put this code in and run it yourself in order to hear it, but I'll give it a go here. Okay, So that sounds all working reasonably well. You might be able to hear it if you turn up your speaker. And when I hit the edge, I get this crashing sound. I've got my score, and if I press space, then I'm ready to start again. And that, I think, is probably enough.